A lot of things happening with regard to the ongoing saga of Penn State. And that includes Jay Paterno and Bill Kenny, Jay Paterno, Joe's son and former assistant coach, filing a lawsuit against Penn State for wrongful termination. Jay Paterno is also releasing a new book about his father's life and death, and in it he addresses the free report point by point. John Ziegler from FramingPaterno.com joins us. John, there was also a big story the other night. Oprah had Matt Sandusky, Jerry Sandusky's stepson, on for an Oprah interview, and I said earlier on the show, she came well-equipped to go after Lance Armstrong, but she was ill-equipped in this interview, or she had her own agenda that Matt Sandusky was abused, and damn the evidence. Doesn't matter if the evidence says he wasn't.
Well, that's a very good way to put it. You know, it's funny you mentioned Lance Armstrong, because I put a video up at FramingPaterno.com where I actually show clips from that horrific Oprah interview. And by the way, I'm not even sure you could call it an interview. It was more like she allowed Matt Sandusky to sit there while she talked to him about her abuse and fed him what he was supposed to say about his alleged abuse. But I actually say, ironically enough, it's amazing how often you and I think alike, that Matt Sandusky's answer or non-answer, which was horrific, I mean, just an absolute train wreck, to the only legitimate question Oprah asked, which was, how do we know you're telling the truth? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but I mean, it was a 0 on a 10 scale answer.
If that's the best he could do, knowing that at some point she might ask that question, he was a disgrace.
Yeah, it was way worse than even Jerry Sandusky's infamous response to Bob Costas, "Are you sexually attracted to young boys?" But I actually believe that his response, as pathetic as it was right out of the Lance Armstrong playbook for lying. I mean, if you look at what he tried to say, which was avoid the evidence, try to pretend that, the media already took a look at this, so there's no need to revisit this. My story's on the record, it's not on the record. In fact, he was changing it dramatically for Oprah herself, because I guess his original story of abuse wasn't good enough. He wraps himself in this notion of, I'm being attacked unfairly, my family's being attacked. By the way, Kevin, as far as I know, I'm the only person who's out there attacking him, so clearly I need a raise.
Let's put it this way. I'd like a show of hands nationwide who knows who Matt Sandusky is. I mean, nobody would recognize him, much less his wife and kids. And if you don't like living in Pennsylvania, if some people in the Penn State area know who you are, then just move. But, you took millions of dollars. That should ease the pain a little bit. And you said his original version of abuse, his actual original version of all of this was that he wasn't abused. Then he had another original version in which he was. And my favorite, John, is this is a guy who, after he supposedly was abused, he fought his ex-wife in court to allow his kids to see Jerry Sandusky.
After Jerry was arrested.
Supposedly,
this was after Jerry Sandusky was allegedly, already indicted, and in fact he was already indicted. He was arrested. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, the notion that Matt Sandusky could have ever possibly thought to himself, you know what, my father here, my adopted father, is arrested, and I was abused by him, but let me fight in court for the right for my children to see him against the wishes of my ex-wife, and then to suddenly, in the middle of the trial, find these memories of abuse which never previously existed. It's absolutely preposterous on its face, and he's obviously lying. We know he's lying. Oprah, unfortunately, was, as you said, ill-equipped to confront him on that. And just to finish off the Lance Armstrong analogy, he finishes that pathetic answer by saying that, I'm just trying to help here, which is basically what, with regard to child sexual abuse, which is basically what Armstrong always tried to do, wrap himself in, well, you can't go after me because I'm helping cancer victims, and therefore, you're causing harm to a lot of innocent people here by attacking me. Well, that to me is an indication that you're lying, and the evidence is overwhelming he's lying, and in fact, he testified, as you implied, Kevin, that he was never abused. Under oath, in the grand jury, he testified that he was never, ever abused in this case, and suspected that the other accusers were not abused either, and it's really remarkable to me when you look at how Matt Sandusky made millions of dollars, became famous, got a career out of this notion, And yet Joe Paterno got destroyed for telling the truth in the grand jury in a way that actually helped put Jerry Sandusky behind bars. It's really amazing.
Matt Sandusky also told Oprah that he didn't know that Penn State was going to pay money to victims. Who believes something that stupid? Why did he think they were being sued? If the alleged victims won the lawsuit, of course they were going to be paid. That's how you resolve civil lawsuits in this country. You pay people.
Right, and bizarrely, Oprah actually says to Matt in that interview, you didn't know that victims were going to be paid when you came forward during the middle of the trial. And Matt says, oh, no, I had no idea. Well, Matt apparently was the only person in the state of Pennsylvania that was unaware of this. And it's rather remarkable that he, after coming home the first day of the trial, after sitting with Dottie Sandusky in the defense portion of the courtroom and being very supportive of Jerry as he had been throughout the entire process, comes home and tells the rest of the family in the living room that he could get up on the stand and lie just like victim number 4 did, and then imply that he can make a lot of money, and then lo and behold, he goes and does that. This is a guy without a conscience, Kevin. And by the way, that's not just me speaking. That's his therapist. That's what his therapist told Dottie and Jerry after he tried to kill himself as a teenager. A suicide attempt he's now lying about and lied to Oprah about, implying that had something to do with Jerry's abuse or alleged abuse, which I know didn't happen. I've spoken to the woman with whom he tried to kill himself, and had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with any alleged abuse. It was the fact that those two were having a relationship while both living under Jerry and Dottie's house, and they didn't like that. And it was very, very clear to this particular woman that Matt was making up his accusations of abuse for the purposes of making money. And he's been able to pull this off. And the fact that he was able to pull this off so easily, Kevin, to me is an indication of the larger reality of this case. That the media was so easily duped. That the prosecution in this case was so easily duped. That Penn State was so easily duped in this case. To me, it destroys all of their credibility. And it's really the rest of this case on steroids. When you realize that Matt Sandusky is a blatant, complete, total, obvious liar, then you start to go, well, wait a minute. What about the rest of this case? And it's important to point out that Matt had an incredibly important role in the trial because it was the threat by the prosecution to put him on the stand if Jerry testified, which is the only way he could get into the trial because he had not been presented in the prosecution's case, which was a huge part of the reason why Jerry didn't testify. And people think, well, how does that make any sense? But as a lawyer, Kevin, you'll understand why. Because Matt was sitting next to Dottie on day one. The jury all saw them there. So now all of a sudden Matt's going to show up as a prosecution witness? That's devastating.
He switches camps. He switched camps, and he switched camps in the middle of this whole thing. People need to know, Matt Sandusky did not sue anyone. He simply got the settlement.
Right. He just accepted a Penn State settlement, which Oprah claimed for him he didn't know he was going to get. And by the way, he says he didn't want to take. Okay, well then who forces you to take it?
Don't take it. Right.
Don't take it.
Don't take
it to charity, or give it to charity.
Yeah, give it to abused children's a fund. Help abused kids out. If you didn't want, I love people who say, I really didn't want to take it. But you did, didn't you? Well, yeah, but I really didn't want to. And then he actually had the nerve to say, with regard to trying to justify how there were episodes that people saw with him and Jerry Sandusky, he says, people thought they were walking in on me. They thought they saw abuse, but then they didn't talk about it. How do you know what they thought?
Well, and who are these people? And who are they?
Yeah. Well, of course, Oprah followed up with that, right? She asked him for a list of those people, right?
Yeah, right. Of course. That was in a fantasy world. I want to make sure we don't miss one really important point, though, because I think this crystallizes the whole case, Kevin, and as a lawyer, I think you'll really appreciate this. So here's the absurdity of this case in a nutshell. So Joe Paterno goes in front of a grand jury and tells what he thinks is the truth, although I believe he had his recollection misrefreshed by Mike McQueary and or Scott Paterno, his son, who was acting as his lawyer, about what Mike McQueary allegedly told him 10 years prior. He does so in a way that I believe, Kevin, is the key to why the prosecution even indicted Jerry Sandusky. I believe that if Joe Paterno says, you know what, I don't remember what Mike McQuarrie told me, I don't think they have the balls to even indict Sandusky because McQuarrie's off on a limb by himself. They have no other witnesses. They have no real evidence. The case stinks to high heaven. And I think that if without Joe Paterno, the most respected man in the state of Pennsylvania, backing up Mike McQuarrie, they don't even go to get an indictment. They don't even arrest Sandusky. And yet it's that grand jury testimony that destroys Joe Paterno's entire life work. A guy of exemplary moral character, 61 years erased because he tells what he thinks is the truth in the grand jury. Flip that around to Matt Sandusky. Matt Sandusky is a horrific human being who goes and by his own current admission, this is the best case scenario for Matt Sandusky, lies in the grand jury by saying he wasn't abused. And it makes it more difficult for Jerry Sandusky to be indicted and more difficult for this alleged pedophile to be put behind bars. And yet he ends up becoming a hero, making millions, getting on Oprah, and now has a brand new career as a child sex abuse expert. Now, that right there, to me, crystallizes the insanity of this entire case, does it not?
It is a bizarre case. It's a bizarre country, though, that Matt Sandusky can profit like this after first saying he wasn't abused, then changing his mind when he realizes what's going on here and the payday that's about to come his way, the windfall that he doesn't want, by the way. It shows you how easy it is if you go after an entity like a Penn State, especially in this case, where there were others saying it happened to them. But how in the world do you go from saying I didn't get abused to I was abused to thank you for the money and, by the way, quit bothering me?
And by the way, let me add some very dramatic elements to the abuse for you, Oprah, because in my original police interview, I didn't remember them yet. And by the way, it's really important to note, Matt, this wasn't like it was sudden information to Matt he was suddenly hit with in the trial. Oh, my God, Jerry's being accused of being a pedophile. He knew. He testified in the grand jury. He knew these allegations for at least a year. The whole world is telling him for months before the trial, Jerry's the worst pedophile in the world, and he's fighting in court for his children to be able to see Jerry after that arrest. And yet suddenly he remembers about grazing of the penis, and then suddenly, apparently, just before going on Oprah, he remembers, oh, by the way, there was oral sex and something to do with my anus, and I'm not really sure what it was. I mean,
here's not only that, but he asked the Sanduskys to adopt him after he now claims he was abused.
Can you say money grab?
This is the biggest money grab going with this guy.
It's unbelievable. But again, I think the important part here is that I think it blows apart the credibility of the entire case against Penn State, against Joe Paterno, and yes, as politically incorrect as it is, Jerry Sandusky, because he is representative of the whole rest of this case just on steroids. It's just easier to see with him. And it's also important to point out, and I did an hour-long video at framingpaterno.com, which I urge people to take a look at, that there was a very important relationship between Matt Sandusky and the so-called boy in the shower in the Mike McQuarrie episode, who, as you know, Kevin, I have tracked down. I know who he is, where he lives. I've made contact with him. I am positive that he has never, ever said he was abused that night or any other night, and yet he got paid $3 million from Penn State. And I believe it was when Jerry Sandusky stupidly told Matt Sandusky just before the trial that victim number 2, whose name is Alan Myers, who lives currently still just outside of State College in a place called Mill Hall, Pennsylvania, in a very nice house thanks to Penn State, that when Jerry told Matt that Alan Myers had flipped, it was at that moment that Matt goes, uh-oh, we're going down. If Alan's flipped, that means we're going to lose. That means my meal ticket is gone. And that means I can flip too, because he knows that Alan was Jerry's biggest supporter as well, having written letters to the editor in his own name, ironically with the title, Kevin, Listen to Matt, as in Matt Sandusky. And oh, by the way, I know this won't shock you, Kevin, they have the very same lawyer, Andrew Shubin, who represented 9 different accusers in this case. You do the math.
How much did Andrew make?
Yeah, you've been, well, he'll make a third of all of that, perhaps perhaps more than that. He may make 40% since it went to trial. You've been criticized on V2.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have been criticized on everything in this case, but what really baffles me is that even some people, a lot of people who are in the pro-Paterno camp will criticize me on victim number 2, Alan Myers, on everything they can possibly make up. And what was really baffling to me about this, Kevin, I think this shows you how important the politically correct element of this case is, how powerful political correctness is, and how afraid everybody is of the truth in this case. So in pro-Paterno circles, it's perfectly appropriate to bash Mike McQueary, to say Mike McQueary is wrong, mistaken, lying, he's not credible, all that. Yet, when you go to this next step and you go, well, we know who the boy was, and he says nothing happened too, so guess what? That means there was no actual assault, and guess what? If McQueary never saw an assault, that means that you got to at least question Jerry Sandusky's guilt. Now, all of a sudden, whoa, you can't actually hold us to any logic here. It's okay for us to bash McQueary, but only as it relates to Joe Paterno, not when it relates to the most important element of the case, which is, did Mike McQueary see Jerry assaulting a boy? Because this entire case is based on that. If McQueary didn't see it, and I'm positive that he didn't, and he didn't tell anybody that he saw it, then everybody, Penn State is obviously innocent, Joe Paterno is obviously innocent, and now you got to gravely question the guilt of Jerry Sandusky, because without McQueary, they got nothing. They only have those people who got paid millions of dollars to claim abuse, none of whom claimed it in their first version of the story. None of them. And they all got paid or trying to get paid or about to get paid millions of dollars, and there's not one shred of physical evidence, and there's not one shred. There's all sorts of absence of evidence here. I mean, there ought to be tons of evidence.
Okay. Yeah. This has gone bonkers. This Oprah thing really is a bad idea on her part. She hasn't had boo to say about this case. She hasn't apparently paid attention to the case based on her lack of preparation for this interview, and yet she'll somehow, by having him on, give him credibility. This is dangerous. This is why media is so dangerous. She knows nothing about this case because she says she was abused when she was a child. If she hears that someone claims abuse, then she's going to be on their side no matter what, because after all, you could have repressed these horrible memories, even though this guy asked to be adopted by his assaulter. He asked to allow him to see his kids after he was arrested.
And I wish I could remember some abuse. I need to win
I need to win a few $1 million. And we're not making light of anyone who's been abused. It's tragic and it's horrible and it's despicable. But in Matt Sandusky's case, the lies are obvious, and Oprah was played for the fool, the absolute idiot in this exchange. And if Matt Sandusky can get the better of you, then I feel for you, Oprah, except for the fact that you're a billionaire.
Yeah, I don't feel too bad for her.
Well, you know, go ahead.
How about the book, John? Now, Jay Paterno's coming out with a book, and he's filing a lawsuit. Now, there are people who are telling me that they don't think Jay has much to stand on in terms of the firing. We'll find out, I suppose. Have you had a chance to read the advanced copy of the book?
Well, interestingly, the website Onward State and State College put out an extraordinarily extensive review/excerpts from the book this morning, and it did not surprise me at all that they were forced to dramatically edit that, because I think they went beyond what is legally acceptable for excerpts in a book without authorization. I actually have the original copy of that review, which I've posted at framingpaterno.com. It's not on the homepage yet because I was going to do the interview with you, but however, you can find it in the blog section. If you go to framingpaterno.com, just click on blog, and it's right there. You can read it. It's really extraordinary on a number of levels, and I thought the part that you would enjoy the most, Kevin, is that Phil Knight writes the foreword for this book. And
that is interesting.
And Phil Knight acknowledges in the foreword that he was wrong to have taken Joe Paterno's name off of a Nike building after the Free Report came out. You may recall that happened within hours after the Free Report came out. And he acknowledges that he was wrong. And not only acknowledges that he was wrong, Kevin, he goes one step further and he says he's sure that if the shoe was on the other foot and that somehow Joe Paterno had been in charge of a decision involving Phil Knight, and the circumstances have been exactly the same, that Paterno never would have thrown him under the bus and removed his name just because of a media firestorm. That's now, frankly, considering how much publicity Joe Paterno's name got, being taken off of the Nike building you would think that ESPN would be leading, right, their newscast today with the notion that Phil Knight has, in a forward for a book for Jay Paterno, has acknowledged that was a mistake. But, of course, this won't be reported anywhere in the mainstream news media, and certainly not on ESPN, because they don't want to revisit this. They screwed this case from the beginning to the end, and now they just want to pretend that it doesn't exist anymore. There were some also...
But they made sure that... John, they made sure they reported that Phil Knight took Paterno's name off the building.
I got a question,
I'll guarantee you
that. If Phil Knight wrote that, did he put his name back on the building?
That was my next question.
Yeah, did he put his name back on the building?
Is Phil Knight following up on his own words? Yeah. And is he putting Joe Paterno's name back on the building?
Well, the entire forward is not in the excerpted portion. My guess is that the answer is no, because obviously it's much more difficult to return. It's much more difficult to return something than it is to keep it up. Once that's the biggest problem with the statue being taken down from Joe Paterno. To put it back up takes far more effort than to prevent it from being removed. But here's the reality. Phil Knight's a coward. He's a hypocrite because he was the first guy at Paterno's memorial to actually stand up and say, basically, this is all BS, in a very stirring speech. But my understanding is, and I'm not trying to get Phil Knight off the hook, but I believe, and this is one of the few things I believe that Scott Paterno told me, is that basically Phil Knight had very little say in this, that this was a shareholder issue, that the Nike shareholders gave him no choice. Because obviously the negative publicity was so intense surrounding the Free Report. Well, now we know the Free Report was bunk. And by the way, speaking of the Free Report being bunk, you'll love this. There's another story in that excerpted version, which you can find at framingpaterno.com, where Jay Paterno talks about his Free Report interview. And there are all sorts of extraordinary anomalies and things that make no sense and which make you go, wait a minute, what the hell's really going on here? But the most bizarre is they told him, get this, they told Jay Paterno that they had information that even up until the point of his arrest, that Jerry was able to bring his victims onto the sidelines at Penn State and put them in Penn State football uniforms. And Jay was like, what? What are you talking about? First of all, Jerry hasn't coached here in 10, 11 years at that point. Second of all, that's absurd because I would know it. Well, they say to Jay, well, we have a photograph of one of these kids. They show him the photograph, and Jay laughs because he knows who it is. It's a guy who he coached for 4 years who was never part of the case in any way, shape, or form and had nothing to do with any of this. And, I mean, that gives you a sense of just how lacking in basic credibility these Free Report investigators were. They were willing to just believe anything that someone put in front of them that was negative towards Penn State, negative towards Paterno, Sandusky at all. And it's just all crap. And to me,
the worst part of that is that people like ESPN, without doing 1 ounce of investigation themselves, buy the Free Report, put it out as fact, and now it's hard to get around the other side of that freight train.
No, exactly right. You can't unring the bell. If we were living in a remotely rational media world, and we're not, you and I know that very, very well. I got to tell you, just within the last week, all the things that have happened should create a cascading effect. There should be an earthquake, a crumbling of the case against Penn State and Joe Paterno. The New York Times was forced to admit in a very positive profile of former Penn State President Graham Spanier that, get this, the case against Spanier might be, quote-unquote, fatally flawed. Really, Sherlock Holmes? You just figured this out now. I mean, they basically spent 4 days with the guy, and at the end of it, I'm paraphrasing, the impression the New York Times got was, gee, this doesn't really seem to add up, does it? Because it doesn't! There's absolutely, I mean, I am positive of a few things in this case. I am not more positive than anything in this case than the fact that Graham Spanier was not part of a cover-up and committed no crimes. I am 1,000% sure of that.
I could not agree more with you. And boy, if I don't even know if these three cases are going to ever go to trial, Curley, Schultz, and Spanier, and I doubt that they will, and they shouldn't. And then, perhaps then, and only then, will some people pay attention to how bogus this Free Report was. Hey, John, we're out of time. Do we have anything else before we wrap it up?
Just find it all at framingpaterno.com, new videos and lots of stuff you won't hear or see anywhere else. I appreciate you staying on the case, Kevin.
You betcha, John. Thank you. We appreciate you being with us. That's John Ziegler from framingpaterno.com.